So Alejandro Nodarse holds an MFA from the University of Miami and is an alum of Las Dos Brujas Writers Conference and a former staff member of the VONA Writers Conference. And Blood in the Cut is his debut novel, so we're very excited to have him here today for that. And Alejandro will be joined in conversation with local author Michael Wiley. So Michael is a Shamus Award-winning author of 12 novels in 4 series. The most recent series features Franky Dast, an exonerated convict who investigates crimes involving the unjustly accused. Michael's short stories have appeared often in magazines, anthologies, including Best Mystery Stories of the year 2022, and he is a former board member of the Mystery Writers of America. He also teaches creative writing and literature at the University of North Florida, and his new novel, Find Your Own Way Home, will release this summer at the end of July. So, Michael, I'll leave the rest to you.
Thanks, Gabriella. Again, these are such amazing events, and we have people like Gabriella to thank for that. Thank you also to Alejandro for coming up here.
Thank you all for being here and for setting this up. And
yeah, I was going to say that's the biggest thanks is to everybody coming out.
Very appreciative. Thank you.
On a hot night, right?
Yeah.
So first of all, congratulations on really a terrific debut novel.
Appreciate it.
Really, really terrific. Publishers Weekly has made this one of their must-read books of this summer. If you know the name S.A. Cosby, he's one of the hot writers writing right now, and he calls this book a fantastic story that's brimming with dangerous energy. And having read a copy of this, I can add my words of praise to say it's all that and more.
Thank you.
Many people, many of the reviews have called Alejandro an author to watch, and this is a great place to start watching. So you're in at the beginning. Now, obviously, with a debut novel, most of us probably are not familiar with Alejandro's work, and so. I'm going to ask if you would just to give us a feel of this to start off with this one proviso. I'm not sure how many of us know Elmer Leonard's work. Elmer Leonard, terrific writer. Yeah, lots and lots of nods, at least some. Elmer Leonard famously wrote 10 rules for writers of crime fiction. And the first and most famous of these was never start a book with the weather. Because it's the kind of stuff that people are bored by. But the reality is that Elmer Leonard started books with the weather on occasion. I have started books with the weather, and nobody starts a book with the weather better than Alejandro. So if you'll take us in to the first
breaking segues from
there
that was fantastic. That was great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the opening chapter, so that there's no context that I need to give you. It's the opening chapter. And so it's chapter 1, the house mid-block on 42nd Street. The sun was a paper cut on the horizon, light welling into the sliced sky like blood. Those early morning beams scaling the horizon cast an incandescent glow on the roof and walls. It made Ignacio Guerra realize that he had never really looked at the house in which he was raised. He'd driven his 1969 ZL1 Camaro into the gated carport countless times. As a kid, he'd wrestled on the patchy lawn with his brother and his cousins. As a teenager, he'd snuck in and out of the bedroom's lone window. He'd snuck girls in too. And hopped the backyard fence to get to the next block. As Iggy stood sweating in the humid dawn, his worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder, he wondered how much of his change in perspective had to do with him maturing and how much was the result of having spent the last 3 years in prison. Iggy had cold-cocked a police informant who'd showed up at the dead end of that very block to set him up. Iggy had just handed him the oxy he'd been stealing from his mother's pharmacy when the guy gave the signal and cops materialized to grab Iggy's wrists and read him his Miranda rights. A sense of betrayal surged up his chest. He broke away from the officer's grasp and delivered a textbook right hook to the informant's temple. Those 3 seconds irrevocably changed things. But it wasn't until this moment, at 23 years of age, that Iggy saw the house he grew up in for what it was. A cinder block rectangle with iron bars over the windows and shingles the color of smeared shit. Only pink hydrangeas and rosemary that Mommy had planted out front offered the faintest pulse of color or life. Iggy doubted that the house mid-block on 42nd Street was a place he'd call home, at least not anymore. He'd give himself the time it took to finish his cigarette before deciding whether to knock on the door or walk away. Iggy blew smoke in the direction of his father's 2002 Chevy Tahoe, a hulking forest green gas guzzler that was parked at an angle in the driveway. A succession of fading stickers for the Republican presidential ticket snaked along the back bumper. A spot open for whoever the 2016 candidates might be. On the patch of green grass between the car and the street, a recycling bin overflowed with beer bottles. Iggy knew what all those dead soldiers meant and considered walking away right then. He flicked his cigarette into the street and turned his back on the house. A car was pulling into the dead end. Iggy held his breath and wondered if it was Sophie. Brake lights flashed when it reached the guardrail. It wasn't her. The driver had mistaken the end of 42nd Street as a pass-through to 107th Avenue. Iggy closed his eyes at the memory of the dead end ablaze with blue and red lights. Seth Baker, the confidential informant who'd posed as Iggy's friend for almost a year, didn't flinch when the cops came out of their cars at the dead end. When Iggy cold-cocked Seth, 3 more cops came out of the hedges and jumped on Iggy. They rode him to the ground while even more cops shouted orders from unmarked vans. Some cops pulled his arms behind his back while others pinned his face to the asphalt with the barrels of their gun. Seth eventually recovered, wiped his mouth, and stomped on Iggy's head despite the fact that his hands were cuffed behind his back. Gravel then stuck to his sweaty face as they emptied his pockets onto the street. He tasted blood. A huge bag of pills lay on the sidewalk beneath the shadow of the basketball hoop that crowned the dead end. Iggy shuddered. He focused on the soft hum of distant traffic, a murmur like a peaceful river. Grass crunched underfoot when Iggy cut across the lawn. The sun beat down on his back as the reflection grew in the wooden door's polish. A muddled blur stood before him when he reached the door. He knocked and stepped away. The hinges swung outward because Armando Guerra insisted upon it when they first moved in. "No one's kicking down my door at medianoche," he'd said. When no one answered, Iggy tried peeking through the windows, but the blinds were drawn. The air smelled like petrichor, but it was more than that. Nestled in each inhale was fresh-cut grass and ozone, the sweetness of the hydrangeas and the woodiness of the rosemary. Mommy had planted them because they reminded her of her childhood, of how her grandfather would pluck one or the other, depending on which route brought him home, and tuck the blossom or sprig behind her ear. At least the house smelled like home. Iggy knocked harder. When no one came to the door, he got his copy of the house key from his duffel bag, along with the lighter that Mommy had gotten him on his 18th birthday. He was curious to see whether or not Armando had changed the lock. He slid the key in and it turned. "Yo, Carlos, Pops, I'm home," he said into the small crack he'd opened. Cold air rushed past his face, and the sweat on his neck tingled. "Mommy," he whispered, looking for a sign that it was okay to enter the house. A shiver ran across his shoulders as if he were unfurling frozen wings.
All right, so we start off with this clearly a character-driven novel with Iggy. We have a kind of an amazingly closely wrought setting in South Florida, Miami, and already, of course, crime at the heart of this. This gets kind of packaged and sold as a thriller, and it's definitely a thriller. In an interview you did, again, it was with Publishers Weekly. I read or listened to that, and you said that you never set out to write a thriller, and yet this is a very thrilling book. As you can already see, it's coming along this way. What did you set out to do? How did the book become what it is?
So what I set out to do, what I wanted to do more than anything was write a book. And mind you, it's easier. Write a book that folks would be talking about in 25 years, in 50 years. Write a book that right now would grab people's hearts and either shatter it or squeeze it or just cause some kind of emotional reaction and write a book that I needed to write. So yeah, no pressure, right? No pressure at all. But the idea was I really wanted to write a book in which I explored what it meant to be a man without women in your life. I wanted to see what would happen if you took many of the men I grew up with. I'm sure that some of them are similar to the men that you grew up with, because there's like this hard kind of guy who is emotionally bereft is not the right word, but close. There's a distance. There's this lack of ability to understand your emotions other than hunger, horniness, and anger. And so I wanted to see what happens if you remove the pacifying effect that women tend to have, particularly in my culture, in the Cuban culture. And so what ended up happening was it's a pressure cooker. And then at the same time, so this thing turned into a 400-page behemoth at one point. And as you can imagine, nobody wanted to touch that thing because 400 pages of this book was buried in it, but you got to get it out. So what ended up happening was, by I guess process of elimination, meaning I stopped paying attention to different characters. I stopped worrying about their arcs. I stopped worrying about their storylines. And I put everybody was a B plot. Everybody was a C plot except for Iggy. Because as it turns out, he's the one that has got the most to lose, and he can lose the most catastrophically. He's the one that if he goes down, they go down. Because Carlos can't do what Iggy does. Armando doesn't have the capacity because he's, wrapped in grief, shrouded in grief. The other men in the family are struggling to handle their own lives. And so what I wanted to do more than anything was, after a while, I was like, okay, let's give Iggy his due. Let's let him run things, and let me just follow this guy and see what he does. And he did.
Yeah, as Alejandro is, suggesting, Armando, for example, is Iggy's father. This is very much a family story.
Yes.
A domestic drama in a lot of ways. And
yes,
your description of what you intended this book to be initially, in some ways, it's never gone away. And so,
right.
One of the key things,
I think we all want that, right? We all want to like emotionally, rattle our reader. And then, of course, we also want to be able to balance that out. We want to give them scenes that are beautiful and let them calm down after we've hit them with something hard. Right. Or rather, because what happens is, in many ways, and I'm sure this happens to you too, maybe it doesn't. When you write a scene and you are just left emotionally wrecked, at the end of it, you're like, what just happened? And so you want to make sure that what you're feeling, if your reader's going to feel it, you have to give them a palate cleanser sometimes. Because you can't just like adrenaline, because you're going to kill them. Nobody can read that. I mean, look at Cormac McCarthy's The Road. That's like the most one of the most books I've ever read. I don't know what the word for that is. I'm just gonna go with.
I just want you to spell it, because that's the word that I think we all feel, right?
There's a couple of U's and R's and maybe some G's in there too. And then what ends up happening is, and I paid attention to books like that, right?
Right.
Like
right.
masters of pacing, because my pacing was a hot mess. It was a catastrophe. Yeah. So what ended up happening when I started pulling stuff away and worked with what I had, the pacing fell in place because I just removed stuff that was slowing it down. And that's how I ended up with the thriller.
Nice.
I had no intention, none at all.
Yeah, well, I think that the most compelling thrillers are the ones in which we have compelling characters, right? Yeah. And places that, even if we've never been there, we can imagine through the page, right? And so one of the other qualities, and you mentioned kind of just name drop her, is Sophie. And so this is not just, this isn't just a thriller. It's not just domestic drama, but in a lot of ways, this is also a love story.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit to the, you're talking about the absence of women in a life, and this is a, again, we get the early name drop, but then she's a motivating.
She is, because it's impossible to remove the effect that women have on you. Period. Or in our world, right? Women make up 51% of the population, if I'm not mistaken. So it's impossible, even if they aren't directly in your life, they're still in your life. And I felt as though one of the difficult things for me was to not let one of the only places that I, as a writer, kind of like grabbed Iggy's lapels a little bit and pulled him his puppy scruff and pulled him back a little bit, was in those interactions with Sophie, because he strikes me as the kind of guy who's not only is he incredibly passionate, but he throws himself into whatever he's doing. And he knew he couldn't throw himself into that relationship again because he had so many other things to handle. And so I think I'll spoil something if I say this, so I'm not going to say what I was about to say. But the idea is that he has to make these decisions where he's got to put his love for her or whatever he feels for her on the back burner because there's a immediate threat right now to himself, his family, his brother, the business, his way of life, the neighborhood in which the butcher shop exists. And then from there, of course, that stems, if the butcher shop goes down, their house can't be far behind. So it's this catastrophic domino effect that he's got to stop.
Okay, so as you know, as I think you're.
Did I give away?
No, nice. You're saying again, butcher shop. That's the family business.
Correct.
Right. No, as I was reading this, and I think this is a question that we often have, and this is one of the great reasons for these events, is we frequently wonder where the writer is in the book. And I know that you've mentioned that you butchered the family hogs.
Sure.
That you've got a background in this.
Yeah.
And again, this is a Miami butcher shop. This is the family business, and that can be lost. That's at stake. Many other things are at stake in terms of family future.
Yes.
And Iggy is this guy straight out of prison, as we were hearing.
Straight out.
Everything is on his shoulders, right? And so, how much of you is in this book? How much is this? How much of this is you butchering those hogs? How much of this is something else? Are you writing what you know, or did you have to learn about what you were writing in order to write it, or both?
Okay, so in order to write about it effectively, I had to go back and learn so that I could then remember those steps and describe accurately. Because in my experience, the experience that I have with butchering meat is very different from a meat processing plant. Is very different from a butcher shop. And so I needed to go back to that. So what I did was, I have the very good fortune of having a sister who is a classically trained chef, and she also taught at Miami-Dade College in the culinary program. So I was like, hey, Vicky, whenever you go to, processing plants, whenever you go to butcher shops, can I tag along? And she was like, yeah, whatever. And she doesn't even remember this. I thank her in the book because she did a lot for me to access that which I did not have in a professional setting. And so I had to learn that. I had to learn it in a way that I could write about it effectively because from my memory is very sloppy. It's very automatic. Taking things apart is very automatic, but I needed to learn how actual butchers did it because what I do and what butchers do are very different things. Butchers know what they're doing. I'm just like, that looks like it's got to go. This is edible, so I'm going to take, right? Like I had to learn a lot. The car stuff, my uncle, my father, our car guys, they are very much... My dad is a Volkswagen guy. He likes Volkswagen Beetles. So I had to steer toward more of the things that I find attractive, like muscle cars and cars that I would never drive because I know I'd hurt myself somehow. And the most fictional thing in the book truly is the car because it's $100,000 car. And there's no way that a dude like he could own it unless he got it really. I mean, he guess he could, but whatever. So yeah, there are things that I had to throw myself into a bit more. The Everglades, I spent a ton of time out there. I close my eyes and I see it. I close my eyes and I can hear it and feel it and know which way I should walk and which way I should stay away from. And you kind of keep an eye on the trails and don't pitch your camp where you're not supposed to be, that sort of thing. So that I know. And my wife and I spend plenty of time out there. Not anymore because it gets hot around this time of year. Nobody's going out there. But yes, so to answer your question, there's a lot of me scattered throughout the characters, but they were very much, I felt often as though I was watching folks do what they were doing and simply kind of taking note. It was very schizophrenic at times because you're just hearing these voices and you're seeing these scenes. And I'm sure that I keep saying to people, I'm sure this happens to you, but the truth is I have no idea. I hope this happens to you. And any of you writers out there, I hope this happens to you where you're just kind of like a conduit.
Yeah, you stage it or
yes.
stage in your mind and then you
hear the dialogue come to you and you sharpen it as best you can. And so yes, to answer your
revise.
Revise. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
For me, that's the fun part.
Yeah,
but
too.
To answer your question, I think there's plenty of me scattered throughout, particularly with the characters that are incredibly determined. I am the kind of person where if you tell me, oh, you can't do that, I'm going to just nod and say, sure, no problem, and then do whatever the hell I want, and then do exactly what you said I couldn't do simply because you told me I couldn't. I'm very easily manipulated, apparently. But it is the truth. I am very motivated, very much like Iggy, by people saying, yeah, you can't do that.
All the more reason.
And me being like,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Can you talk a little bit more? Again, we heard a little bit in the introduction, a little bit more about how you became a writer and kind of the process. Again, Gabriela was mentioning Las Dos Brujas.
Yes.
So which is a very interesting writers workshop.
Yes.
I know
I gotta see
you
it.
have an MFA. You
Yes.
have other experiences. So
Yes.
what was your how did you become an accidental thriller writer?
So when I was a child, about 3 years old, my father had to broker a deal with me because I was constantly doing my own little caveman paintings on walls all over the apartment. I saw those walls as like a canvas or a blank page. I didn't know it at the time, but I was like, that needs to be filled with information. And I would draw. It didn't make any damn sense. It was like an attempt at a triangle, these horrific circles that were just, 3-year-old wobbly circles. And eventually what he did is he said, okay, this piece of wall is yours. No, you can't paint over here, because he couldn't stop me. Or rather, he could have, but it would have been fatal to me. So he didn't. He said, this is your wall. And so from that point forward, I really remember I was like, okay, well, then this is it. That was my first commission, almost, is what it felt like. Like I had gotten access to what I wanted to do. And I wrote in middle school. One of my teachers submitted a story that I had written, and it won first place in the county fair. I had all of the raw material, but I was not refined and not well read. Meaning I only read the things that I liked and couldn't, because I didn't. Okay, and this is kind of a cop-out too, because my mother has a PhD in Latin American studies. So I read a lot. But in terms of reading as a writer, I hadn't done that. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know what to look for. And I felt as though I needed professionalization. Not everybody needs that, but I did. I felt like I would benefit from it. Plus, I understood that community was part of it. And so by joining an MFA and throwing myself into just a writing community for the past, how long have I been alive? For a long time. Especially the professionalization of it, where you just go to events, and if you like a writer's work, you're like, hey, I make a point of, hey, I love your work, and I do it. I'm so awkward sometimes. I just finished meeting Dwyer Murphy. He writes some beautiful stuff, and I met him at he was doing what you're doing for me, for one of my buddies, Andrew, whose book came out. It's called Victim, beautiful book. And I remember I walked up to Dwyer and I was like, hi, I'm Alejandro. I really like your stuff, and I just wanted to come say hi. It's like the weirdest thing. I don't know what happened to me. I was like,
the longer that you spend in this profession, the less embarrassed you are about being a fanboy.
Oh.
I mean, because
I'm like, listen, I'm about to fanboy.
We've got our heroes, and
and
these kinds of events, you get to,
like Sean Cosby. I was like,
Yeah.
hi, I'm Alejandro. You blurred my book. I want to thank you. I don't know what to say other than thank you. Like, and the thing is, I was like so grateful, so, because he didn't have to blur my book.
And Sean Cosby is fairly new on the scene, like in the last 5 years.
he's the
And so he's at
man.
the same time,
Yeah.
he's, when Stephen King
Yes.
sent out a tweet saying, I love that book, Sean is beside him. So
That's kind of
Cosby.
That's
Yeah, and so this never goes away.
And so I was just like, I did that awkward thing where I'm just like, okay, abort. And I'm not normally that awkward. At least I think I'm not. But in that case, I was like, so I ran away. But being in the, that's what I love about writing. You are always a fan. You're always a fan. It doesn't matter how big you get. You're always a fan. And the best part is that you become a conduit for other writers, and you kind of like bring up people, and you do what you're doing for me right now, which I very much appreciate. You were hosting me in a city that I don't know anybody. I would just be sitting here just staring at you guys awkwardly, like, if it weren't for you. So thank you.
No, my pleasure.
But so yeah,
Thank you for coming.
I needed that. I needed the.
You use the phrase reading as a writer, and I think that's a really key thing. And again, I'm not sure how many of us out here also write, but reading the work that we read with attention toward the craft, attention toward the way that a writer starts with the weather or doesn't start with the weather. Creates scenes, creates characters, dialogue, all of these other kinds of things. That's a big key. That's the best lesson, better than an MFA program, right?
Yes.
Now with that in mind, I was looking at the Lit Chat thing on that the library has put up. I'm not sure how many of us reviewed that after Alejandro put up his list of recommended books for the summer.
Yeah.
And I got a kick out of this. This is the best collection, the strangest collection of book or of works that have influenced.
Thank you. That's what I said.
I'll cite just 3 of these. One is Susan Orlean's Orchid Thief. Now, Susan Orlean's was just here. In fact, we had one of these conversations as well. Terrific writer. If you haven't read The Orchid Thief, again, a lot in the Everglades.
Please do. Please do.
Second, Ace Ventura, Pet Detective.
He's the first Florida man.
Yeah.
He's the first Florida man.
You put these side by side, and then also Swamplandia by Karen Russell.
Gotta read that.
Right? Exactly.
Gotta read that.
And so these were just 3 out of, I don't know, 8 or something like that. Examples.
Zora Neale Hurston's eyes. Oh, just her in general. Hotel Cocaine.
You could call this a hodgepodge, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So how is this your, learning to read as a writer? Why this list?
Man, that's a great question. So that list came from different. So part of what happens with me is that I start to circle the wagons when I enter a project, meaning I get very hungry when I'm reading, but what I tend to do is find things that are in some way, even if they're just tangential, even if they're some way tied to what I'm doing. So right now I'm writing a book that takes place in Exit 1 at the very end of the turnpike, at the end of Miami. It's not even Miami anymore. It's Miami-Dade County. But Miami, Florida's Miami are weird that way, where we have a big municipality, we have a big county, and a bunch of little cities, because the city of Miami proper itself only has like 400,000 people, but Miami-Dade County has 4 million people living in it. So we have this weird government which never works in our favor. But in any case, I'm always searching for things that are going to inspire me and push me, and I want to see how writers do what they did, the things that I love. How did they do it? How did you pull that move on me? Because when I first read a book, a lot of times, like I just finished reading this book, it's coming out tomorrow, Assassins Anonymous, Rob Hart. Bruh, what a book. What a book. And the thing was that he killed me because I was reading it as a reader, but I have to talk to him about it. So I was like, crap, I got to read it again. And I was like, wait, that's not a problem. I got to read it again so that I could do it with the writer's eye in mind. And so what I do is I look for things that are going to push me to be a better writer while informing me content-wise, thematically. So I read widely and I watch a bunch of stuff. Like, for example, Hotel Cocaine is coming out. I cannot wait to watch this show because it's the premise is the most overlooked element of Miami in particular. It's a show about the mutiny, which is the Copacabana of Miami in the late 70s, early 80s, around the time of the McDuffie riots, around the time of Mariel boat lift, around the time where Miami was entering the national conscience as a city to like watch out for. So these are things that I'm always thinking, particularly if I'm setting a book. If my books are set, they're all set down there because I cannot avoid the Everglades. Wherever the Everglades are, that's where I'll be. That's what I'll be writing about because I can't. It's something that I am of that. Whatever. The point being, back to so what I end up doing is I read and watch things very widely, and I start to pick up the different things that are done well, and I say, okay, that's how they did that, so that I can do my own version of it. For me, I love to read, and I'm very slow. I'm a very slow reader. I have horrible ADHD. I really have to like sit myself down and be comfortable and make sure that that's where I'm at. But that's why I always tell my students, I always read with something in my hand so that I can write down reactions, so that it's an active process as opposed to passive. Because this is reading. Nothing is happening. But if I have a pen in my hand, a lot is happening. I'm engaged. And I mean, obviously I'm engaged mentally, but physically as well.
Yeah,
so,
I can barely read a newspaper without a pen in my hand. I mean,
amen. Yeah, I was looking at your notes. I was like, man, he's one of me. He's one of mine.
Yeah. No. Yeah, it's one of the losses with moving to electronic books is, the ability to
You can still highlight and stuff, but it's not the same. It's not the same.
Yeah,
It isn't.
Yeah.
And I try.
But I'm a dinosaur, right? So the Cuban American connection is strong. In that list, I don't think that there were any Cuban American or Cuban writers on that, and I'm thinking of maybe like Leonardo Padura. I'm not sure if you know the Havana Quartet. He's a crime writer.
I haven't read them, but
Yeah.
yes, I'm aware of them.
Yeah. But are there any Latinx or Cuban writers who are important here too?
So the thing is, there's a lot of Cuban writers that are important to this book in particular. So Cristina Garcia, first and foremost, it all begins and ends with her as far as I'm concerned. I love the way that she brings in these polyphonic chapters, these short chapters. She's an expert at voice. Her plots are fluid and languid, and you have no idea. It's like you're following the laziest running of water in the Everglades, and you have no idea what you're going to bump into. So for me, it begins with her. I love Chantel Acevedo's work. I'm a big fan of her. Everything that she writes is good. It's a good problem to have. Who else? I read a lot of. I don't know if I read a lot of Cuban folks. When they come out, I'll read the book. Obviously, Alex Segura. He's
also,
the Pete Fernandez stuff. Hello.
And Alex Segura, speaking of Ace Ventura, his background is with Archie Comics. And so the crossovers between genres, is very.
He's writing Dick Tracy.
Yeah, Dick Tracy. No, yep, exactly. Terrific writer. Just a terrific writer.
I want to do what he does. It's not even a secret. I see him and like Rob Hart and all these guys that are so good at, I'm going to write this novel here. Oh, and I have a series going too. Oh, and I'm working on these graphic novels over here. Oh, and these comic books, I'm doing that too. And it's like, bro, when do you sleep?
Right.
When do you sleep, Alex Segura? When do you sleep, Rob Hart? Because whatever you're doing, I need to learn how to do.
Yeah, if you don't know Rob Hart's work,
you're gonna.
Most recent,
you're gonna hear about Assassins Anonymous.
Publicity was The Warehouse.
Great book.
Yeah, great book and a terrific writer. Well, let's shift a little bit back to characters.
Let us.
A little bit on the setting, and then we can open up to some questions. We've heard about Iggy. Iggy is, again, he's out there to save his family, save the family business,
yes,
to redeem himself, to maybe find a way back into love, and with lots and lots of pressures with that, we won't do the spoilers here to give.
Not on purpose.
Yeah, that's important. My second favorite character, and this is one that this is a character that only, again, kind of briefly mentioned, and I'd be interested to hear more about this character, because very much a strong motivator, as much as maybe this love interest, Sophie, and that's Azúcar Prieta, which is brown sugar, yes, which is the name of
the car, his Camaro, his ZL1.
Can you tell us about the role of the car, what it means to him, and what part his car plays in this? This is not Christina by Stephen King.
No,
or Christine,
no.
I guess. But yeah.
So I've never lived in Jacksonville, but if you've lived in Florida in a big city, which this is, traffic is a thing. Traffic happens. Miami has some of the most horrific traffic on the planet. We Miamians spend a ton of time in our cars. I think most Floridians, because our state, our state was never designed to have any kind of reliable public transportation. We are slaves to the car by design. We can get into that later. But the point is that we get some really cool cars. And I love muscle cars, anything from like 65 to like mid 70s, particularly Camaros. I love Camaros. They are powerful. They are a symbol of a time in American history where, we were just like, I don't care if I get 7 miles to the gallon. Gas is 25 cents. We can't do that now. But the idea is the car, in many ways, is representative of Iggy's ability to, at any point, leave. It was also something that he figured, with him being in prison, that his father would have sold that thing in order to pay for bills, but he never did. And Iggy figures that it was partly because of his mother, but then he also understands that it's the one place that he and his father, there's like a truce in that car, because his father was the one that kind of gave it the name without even realizing it. Because when Iggy decided, oh, I want to get this particular paint color, I want to do this to the car, because he was selling his mother's pills from her pharmacy and kind of like working the books, cooking the books a little bit, and he was using that money to fix the car. And he wanted to spend time with his father and fix the car, but he got away from him because fast money does that to you, especially fast money with what you're feeling is no repercussions. And then that got away from him, as we read early. And the idea behind the car is that it's, in many ways, it's a symbol of Iggy's, because he has it but doesn't drive away. It's one of those ways in which we see how committed he is. He loves that car. It means the world to him. He built it. He fixed it up, and it cost him a lot. That car cost him a lot. So that's why
it's a powerful image, right?
Yeah.
And knowing that, is really nice. In some ways it's both,
especially since it's a rare car. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the sin, but it's also part of the redemption.
Correct.
Possibilities for running away. It's also part of the means of staying.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now you talk about his father as well, and Iggy and his father Armando have a very, let's say, complicated relationship, difficult relationship.
That's the word. Yeah.
And so if there's a kind of a phrase that's connected to Iggy, it's again the name of this car, the word that is connected to his father is resolviendo, right?
Yes.
Can you explain the meaning and the purpose, and why is this the word that? Because again, he's key.
So resolviendo means you're resolving things. But that's the literal translation. But resolviendo is this. There's always, every one of us here has at some point or another we're in that spot where we're like, okay, I got to buy groceries or I got to pay the light bill. And you're going to figure out a way to do both, because you really need both. Even if that means for this month you don't pay the light bill because you know they won't cut it off until next month. When I lived in Tallahassee, that's what I would do. I would just pay one, keep one, pay one, keep one, pay one, keep one. But the idea is, resolviendo is, you're going to figure that shit out one way or another. And I say it like that because that's what it is. It's down, dirty. You're in the weeds. You're a grunt in your own trench that the world has thrown you into, and you got to figure out a way out of it. That's resolviendo. And by hook or crook, you're going to find a way to make sure that which you love is taken care of, even if it means that you have to bear the brunt of all of the ugliness and all of the undesirable consequences of whatever it takes to make sure that they don't suffer, but you will suffer. You're going to suffer. You're going to sacrifice.
So those two forces together, the car and this notion, are key. A final question and then a short one to follow that.
I feel like I've been here for 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly. So with all this in mind, again, there's some questions that seem to me to be key to the center of this book. One would be, is it harder to forgive others or to forgive yourself? And does, if you redeem yourself, if there's a way to redeem yourself, does it involve always, what you could consider to be a kind of a harrowing, going deep into the dirt, deep into the Everglades, deep into the kind of the roughest part of the rough? So is it harder? That's in many ways the question of this book is forgiving yourself, forgiving others.
I find it easier to forgive others.
Yeah.
I hold myself to a higher standard than I hold anybody else.
Yeah, I think that's something that Iggy
and Iggy does.
Yeah, Iggy he's made some bad mistakes.
Horrific.
And others around him have also made some terrible mistakes. But one feels him fighting for that the whole time. And so the final one is: are we going to see more of Iggy, or are you going on, in this the last exit before we hit the keys?
Sure.
Where are we?
So the book I'm writing right now has nothing to do with Iggy. It has everything to do with Miami. So I guess it has something to do with Iggy. But I have already planned out where I want to go for the next couple of books, assuming that my editor wants to buy them. The second one's already, it's coming. That one, I don't know when it'll be out. Hopefully 2025, 2026. I don't know. My editor will decide. But after that, this is the best way to describe it. think of a so if you think of like a closed room whodunit, but instead of it being a closed room, it's a nuclear missile silo that actually exists and existed in the early 60s all the way through the late 70s in the Everglades, in Everglades National Park. And what happens when someone starts slowly taking down all the soldiers responsible for launching those so that they cannot launch some kind of counterattack, and what would happen if that took place. So it's kind of like think Clue, but in the Everglades, in the middle of nothing. These guys had nothing out there, and there's a lot of history that I get to play with. So that's my third one. But for my fourth, I'm definitely planning to come back to Iggy. That stuff is still fresh in my head.
Yeah, sounds like a thriller.
Yeah.
Well, let's give Alejandro a big round.
Thank you all. Appreciate it.
A big thank you.
And we have some questions.
Yes. Well,
And I want to also say that, if you want to find out more about Iggy, and you do, there are books that will be available after.
Yeah, I got to get better at like pitching myself.
Yeah.
Michael,
Well,
he's
A good friend of mine says, "I don't care if you read it. I just care that you buy it."
No, I want you to read it.
I know. I do
The
too.
best of
And
both.
the reality is he does too.
I do.
He cares more about the reading. And
definitely want you to
the
read it.
library is the perfect place for that.
Awesome. Well, we're already getting a roll on collecting the questions, but thank you again to Michael and Alejandro for such a wonderful conversation, and we're excited to continue it with our audience questions. If you haven't had a chance to, please write your questions, and if at any point, just hold it up and our volunteers will collect it, but I see we already have some ready, so I will hand it off to Michael to ask. Here you go.
All right. Is this book, I think we just answered that, in a way, is this book a start in a series for this particular genre? Do you see a spin-off books for any of the Blood in the Cut characters?
Definitely. I have so much Carlos stuff written that it's crazy. Like a whole arc on Carlos. But yes, trust me, that's a coming.
Yeah, and so this one, again, I think that you largely answered, but you might want to expand on it a little bit. Are you obligated, contracted to write another book based on the first one being published? In other words, did the publishers say that they'll publish only if you commit to more, as in the freedom to decline?
I'm not that lucky. Yeah. No, so I was very fortunate in that I got a 2-book deal. They let me write whatever I want. So Blood in the Cut was the first thing that I had for them. And then the next one is Exit 1, which is very different. But I do plan on coming back to this world, assuming that you guys like it. Let's be real. I'm going to write the damn thing anyway. Whether people buy it or not, that's the different thing. That's out of my hands. But I kind of need to like work some kinks out of that world. But yes.
Right. And Flatiron,
thank you, Bobby,
which is the publisher to Macmillan imprint, is doing some of the really, really terrific books. And so, usually you don't track books down by the publisher, but a 2-book deal is, worthy of applause.
Thank you.
And again, I think you addressed your next projects.
Exit 1.
There you go. How do you structure your writing time? X number of hours in a day, X number of words, or pages, just vibes? How do you write?
So I'm going to tell you right now, cut me off because
okay, that's enough. No.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try to run through this as quickly as possible because it's a great question. When I begin a project and the seeds are in my head and they're germinating and they're growing, I write everything by hand. I take notebooks, the same 3 or 4, the same notebook, and I fill them. I'll write on one side of the page. I'll flip it because I like the legal style. I like them to be small so I can carry them with me in my little bags because I like to carry it everywhere I go. Once I have that done, I put together a treatise. Now, this is my new way of doing it, but it's very much my old way. I just add steps to it. I put together a treatise. I ended up putting together, it was like 30 pages, single spaced, or no, I don't know. The point is, it's a lot of, and I mapped out what I want the book to be. And then I talked to my agent real quick, and I was like, look, I want to make sure I don't have any hills that I'm going to die on, because once I put it in my editor's hands, it's collaborative. When I keep it, it's mine. And I have to be collaborative because she's a better reader than I am. So I want to make sure that I have that. Once I have that done, and I get any feedback from my editor or my agent, or one of them two, I print that out and I make a checklist. I go through their notes and I'm like, yes, 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 yes. The truth is, I don't think there has been, the only thing that I have held back from was one particular scene in the book, and I now understand why she didn't want that one in there, but it didn't bother me. I stand by it. I stand by it. You needed that scene in order to really understand what it was Iggy was up against, because without that, I can't whitewash that, and you'll see what it is if you read the book. And once I have that checklist done, that's where the fun starts, because I'm a list guy. I like to pop, go through it. So I start, and of course this takes a lot of time. I'm talking about it like it happens quickly, but they'll say something like one of the notes that I got was, Azúcar Prieta is a dynamic character in this book, but it's severely underused. Do you think that there's anything you can do with it? And then she'll offer some suggestions, and she's always spot on. My editor is brilliant, and I hope she always wants to work with me. And so what I do is I go through and I'm like, oh, damn, she's right. So then I kind of like go for a walk. I like gardens. I love gardens. I'll go for a walk. I'll take the dogs out. I'll take them for long walks. Well, not one of my dogs is Barkley. He's a micro American bulldog, and he gets to the point where he doesn't want to walk anymore. He's 30 pounds, and he just flops. And he's like, I'm done. So I have to drag the guy. So I try not to take him. I take Kawhi. He's the husky. He likes to walk. So, I'll go for walks. I don't talk about it much. I don't talk about it to anybody, really. I feel as though your inspiration is a balloon, and your job is to keep that tight, and every once in a while, blow into it to keep it. And when you're talking about it, you get the sensation you accomplished something. Yeah, I talked about my book, and you didn't do shit. So I don't do that. And then once that ball starts rolling, that's what I do. I just hit it and hit it and hit it, and I write obsessively. I'm almost like manic with it. Once I laser focus on something, get out of the way, and that's how I knew that the best work I've ever done, be it from like when I was an arborist, I used to chop down trees in Nebraska, or when I taught as I was a slam poetry coach, or when I taught at the University of Nebraska, I taught creative writing there. The best work I've ever done is my own writing. This is what I'm best at. Everything else I'm good. I know I'm a good teacher. I understand that because I know the material. I know how to explain things. I can kind of like, look at people and be like, you get it? And then understand that they don't get it and be like, okay, let me try again. But man, and so when I hit that, I am relentless. My wife is like, please put that down. Put it down. Let's go eat. Let's go do something. And I'm just like, bro, I just got to get this last sentence in, please. And you have to divvy up your time, because if left alone, I wouldn't talk to anybody for 3 or 4 months. Truly. Just give me air conditioning, several humidors full of cigars, and get out of my way. And pens. I'm really weirdly obsessed with pens. I don't know how many of them right now. I probably have some in here. Yep, I do. I like pens, and I'm very particular about the ones that I write, because if I get the right tool for the right moment, boom, I'm gone. And for me, the best thing in the world is to be putting this stuff down, knowing that later on, I'm going to perfect it. Yeah. So I never stop myself. Part of it is just like write whatever dialogue. I'll switch pens, to like when somebody talks, I don't do indents. I just write line from edge to edge. When somebody else talks, I throw one pen down, grab the other one, grab another one. I just go. I don't worry about formatting. I don't worry about spelling. I don't worry about shit. I just get it down because it comes to me that way.
Hemingway famously, supposedly said, he supposedly said, write drunk, edit sober. Right. And so we've got a drunkard right here.
I drunk with writing, definitely, 100%.
And so, I think that the answer to number of hours a day, number of words or pages, it's once
I can answer that.
You go and go.
Yes, but during the pandemic, what I did was I would write and I would track what I was doing like a lawyer. So if I go back and I journal everything, my days are lists, and I just do it like that. And I know that there was a time where I had a 10-week stint where I was working 8 hours a day, if not more, sometimes 12. And what I would do at the evening is reread what I had written, leave notes for myself, and then go to sleep. I would wake up, I'd work out, eat something, and go. And this was the generative phase. This wasn't revision. So when you hit that flow state and you're able to tap it again, and you don't have to chase it down, you just find it whenever it is that you're focused on. Like if you're a mechanic and you love working on this particular car, you're just like dying to get to it. That's how I was. I was just all my crazy manic energy was funneled into that, and I'm so grateful for that, because otherwise I would have just been like, I'm a live wire otherwise.
Yeah,
Useless.
one of the wonderful things about a question like this is that no matter how many times one asks it, you'll get that many different answers.
100%.
There's there's the outliners. There's what we call the
pantsers,
right, where it's writing by the seat of the pants, and all these other kinds of.
That's
things.
how I revise. I revise that way.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yeah, and we heard it went from 400 plus pages to finding the story in there, and so again, it's
Thank you for that question. Thank you.
If there were a formula, if you come up with the formula, you can sell it.
Yeah.
What's your favorite genre to read?
Anything. You know what I'm reading a lot of now? I'm reading a lot of like, historical nonfiction. Things like Eric Larson. Man, I can't get enough of that guy. Eric Larson can do no wrong. Right now I'm reading a book called The Year of Dangerous Days by Nicholas Griffin. I think it's Griffin. I'm reading that because I am always so drawn to the world of Hotel Cocaine, that show that's coming out. And I was like, wait a minute, like there had to have been some source material, and somebody pointed me in the direction of that book, and I'm just like, oh, there's something here. There's definitely something here. That was the same sound I made. The first time I set foot onto the nuclear missile silo that exists, that was my reaction. I was like, there's something here. Because think about all the people that have lived there, all the miserable hours they had there. They had German shepherds as guard dogs. They had freaking nukes in the Everglades. Oh, look, there's a gator, a nuke, a panther. Cool. And then a bunch of guys out there in olive green sweating their tuchuses off. You know that's a powder keg. I got so excited I started flipping syllables.
We have a place in town known, I'm not sure how many of us are familiar with it. I think it's called the Yellow Water Site. Do people know of that? Again, it was, I wouldn't call them silos, but they're kind of concrete bunkers that I think were used also to store.
Yeah, because in Florida, we don't have silos. We launch from the surface.
Exactly.
Because we can't dig down. There's limestone.
You can find it. You can visit it.
That stuff always fascinates me.
So a final question. What do you want your readers to understand about the Miami Cuban community?
We're not a monolith.
I'm sorry?
We're not a monolith.
Not a monolith.
That experience,
communities.
Yeah, in this book, that's just one view of Miami. And that's one of the things I love about a city like Miami, and I think it's true of every city. You have millions of different experiences with the city. Yeah, there's things that there's a lot of overlap. Miami is the parties. Miami is the neon nightlife. Miami is the drugs and tan bodies. But it's also the Everglades. It's also the mom who wakes up at 3 a.m. because she's got another shift to go to make sure that, her son gets fed. There is the freaking millionaire who wakes up and does a bump of coke and does whatever the hell he does on that day and hits his yacht or whatever. It's all of that at once. And so, like every community, it would be like, what do white people think of Jacksonville?
Yeah, good. Exactly. I think that's exactly the right answer. And part of my reading of this too was that this is a book of neighborhoods.
Yes.
This is not
true
Miami Vice, right? It's not. This is the various neighborhoods and the crossing of boundaries, the crossing,
right?
And that's again, your answer to that question, I think is
a great question.
Yeah, but no, it's a great answer, which is to say that the richness is in the complexity
100%.
And within the variations.
If I gave you everything you already know about Miami, why would you read my book? If I wrote about everything you already know about Miami, why would you read my book?
Because I appreciate my own thinking more than you
wouldn't.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I got nothing to say. You'll visit a city that you haven't seen before.
I guarantee it.
And visit characters and get to know characters.
Yes.
Once again, thank you to everybody.
Thank you all. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for having me.